Welcome to the Disneyland Beat, where our toes tap to a Disneyland drum.
And we always whistle while we work.
Disneyland and Walt Disney World have a lot of the same rides and attractions.
Many attractions built today, like those found in Galaxy's Edge or the recent Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway, are near-perfect clones of each other.
But things are not always what they seem, nor is it always the case. Sometimes they can be much bigger or smaller depending on where and when they're built.
Today, we're going to take a look at several iconic rides that exist in both parks and how the ride's shape and scale change between Disneyland and Walt Disney World.
Come on into the parks with us.
Like, subscribe, and stick around.
Disneyland is your land.
Come seek an adventure at your pirates, eh?
Made the jump to Lightspeed.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1,
Hi, I'm Amy.
And I'm TC. Let's start out with one of my favorite rides at any Disney park, Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. Designed by Tony Baxter, the Frontierland coaster was installed at Disneyland in 1979 and a year later, Walt Disney World in 1980.
At Disneyland, the ride replaced a very large touring attraction that included Nature's Mine Train through Wonderland. The sprawling area and its backstage support have since not only seen the Frontierland expansion, it also includes Galaxy's Edge as well. They had a lot of real estate to work with for this attraction in 1979.
At Walt Disney World, the new coaster replaced the Mickey Mouse Revue, an animatronic theater show that actually offered up less real estate than Disneyland had to work with.
If we overlay the current Disneyland image of Big Thunder with the Walt Disney World image set at the same scale, we can notice some differences.
Magic Kingdom's version is a bit bigger, which is often the case, but it is fairly close. Walt Disney World's version is hemmed in by the rivers of America on one side and the railroad on the other.
They sit on different sides of the river, with Haunted Mansion at Walt Disney World and Big Thunder Mountain Railroad at Disneyland sharing the same space. Disneyland does not have enough room west of the river, but still inside the berm for a big coaster.
And Big Thunder at Disneyland has been designed so you can walk almost entirely around it, much like the Seven Dwarfs Mine Train.
It's also interesting to look at the rivers of America themselves. Of course, Disneyland's waterways were built in a desert, and they had to solve the problem of how to keep it from draining away, whereas in Florida, they were in a swamp. All you had to do was dig if you wanted a pond.
The Rivers of America in Orlando is connected to a larger lake that is around the park, but other than that, they're actually much closer in size than we thought they would be. Disneyland's river is actually shorter than it once was, too, with a section being removed to make room for Galaxy's Edge.
The northern section of the river at Walt Disney World has a greater curve, adding some distance, and as a result, its island is a little bit bigger. We weren't expecting this. Tom Sawyer's Island at Walt Disney World can seem huge, but then we remembered much of Pirate's Lair at Disneyland is inaccessible or dedicated to Fantasmic.
The center of any Magic Kingdom is the hub. Walt Disney's idea was that this was the threshold to all of the themed lands, the heart of the park. When comparing the hubs between the two different parks, there's some similarities and some big differences.
Magic Kingdom in Orlando has much larger moats and water features as well, and several additional concentric rings of walkways around the center hub than Disneyland does, but they're not that different in size. The distance between the castle and the last building on Main Street, USA is almost exactly the same, so north-south, they are similar.
But if you measure it east to west, the distance from the entrance to Tomorrowland and the entrance to Adventureland, it's almost twice as far apart at Walt Disney World than it is at Disneyland. Disneyland is really much more compact.
Disneyland's Space Mountain is slightly smaller than Walt Disney World's, but it does have some things that make up for that. It has a lot of surrounding buildings that have grown up around it over the years, as well as the companion Carousel Theater, which has the exact same circular footprint.
Walt Disney World's version houses two separate tracks with single-row vehicles, while Disneyland has a single track but dual-seat coaster trains.
Walt Disney World's building is much taller as well, but that doesn't mean the coaster is that much bigger. Disneyland's structure is built 20 feet into the ground, so its building would not tower over the smaller scaled park.
Walt Disney World's version is also one of the few rides to have its building outside of the perimeter of the park, something that's pretty common at Disneyland, where all of Tomorrowland is inside the berm. It's also kind of fun to look at how much bigger the Tron Light Cycle Run footprint is than either of these coasters. It's absolutely enormous.
Test Track in Epcot and Radiator Springs Racers in Disney California Adventure use very comparable ride systems, though the experience is quite different. Overall, the two rides have a similar sized footprint.
Radiator Springs Racers has a square-shaped show building that's covered in solar panels that generates power for the park, while Test Track has a circular-shaped building that is quite a bit larger, but it also houses the queue and the loading station, so there's really not that much more room dedicated to the ride portion itself.
Test Track is themed to the design and testing of cars, so the outdoor portion of the track makes sense going over the parking lots of Epcot, but we are glad that the immersively themed version in Radiator Springs only has views of the Cadillac mountain range.
Test Track's relatively underwhelming outdoor portion has 2 large curves, whereas DCA has 3, and these large banked curves are what make this part of the ride fun for us. Otherwise, it's really just driving.
Looking at Disney's 2 round river raft rides, Disney California Adventure's Grizzly River Run is often touted as the longest and tallest river raft ride in the country. However, when you compare it to Animal Kingdom's Kali River Rapids, its footprint is smaller.
Kali River Rapids is in reality a much shorter ride experience. It just circles a simple perimeter circuit, while Grizzly River Run winds around the mountain streams and the chutes, and it crosses over itself and again, and it makes a much greater, longer, and gradual descent down 2 drops and through tunnels before completing its run.
And another difference is the width of the chute. Kali River Rapids has a wider river with larger ride rafts, while Grizzly River Run is narrower with smaller rafts. One of the results is that Grizzly River Run's rafts can spin like crazy, even going down the big drop.
As far as we're concerned, though, neither of them get everybody on the ride wet enough every time.
And speaking of getting wet, Splash Mountain, soon to be Tiana's Bayou adventure, is fun to check out. It has a very interesting footprint and is really well designed. In both parks, the attraction manages to look very large, even mountainous, while squeezing into a tiny amount of space.
Both Walt Disney World and Disneyland have almost identical footprints, with Disneyland's looking just a touch longer or wider as it has to make it past the Haunted Mansion building before you can go into its show building.
But both function the same, built over railroad tracks with much of the ride outside of the park perimeters and another part of the ride that stretches underneath a major pedestrian path stretching and connecting to the rivers of America.
It's really cool to me how similar they are, but how they work with their surroundings so differently at the same time.
Okay, comparing these two really isn't that fair. Matterhorn Bobsleds was built in the 1950s and is not likely to have the same scale and tech as a newer, massive supercoaster.
But when you do, you see that Expedition Everest's actual mountain isn't that much bigger than Disneyland's Matterhorn, even though it has 2 peaks.
But then when you start to include the amount of land taken up by the outside portion of the ride and the extensive queue and loading area, you get a better sense of how much larger Expedition Everest really is.
If you count everything, Everest is likely 4 to 5 times larger than Disneyland's Matterhorn, which manages to keep everything, including 2 tracks, the queue, the loading area, all inside a small mountain footprint that you can walk all the way around.
Well, that's it for us today. We hope you had a fun time investigating the shape and scale differences between Disneyland and Walt Disney World rides.
May the light in the firehouse window always shine brightly.
And may your dreams always come true.
See you real soon, Mouseketeers.